back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover from District 7. And we were going to be joined today by Assemblywoman Megan Daly from the 1st Assembly District in the North State. She got called into some urgent budget hearings. And so today we are being joined by our first non-legislator host, Chris Micheli. Chris is a founding partner of the Sacramento governmental relations firm Apray and Micheli. He has been a licensed attorney for 30 years, as well as a registered lobbyist for more than 25 years. He's authored 4 casebooks and authored or co-authored textbooks. He is an adjunct professor at McGeorge School of Law, as well as a lecturer at the UC Davis King Hall School of Law. Welcome, Chris. How are things going today?
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Well, over the weekend we spent working because all of the budget trailer bills and the 2 budget bills junior came out. So we were sending them to clients and getting feedback and talking to legislators and staff over the weekend. So I feel like the work week began Saturday morning.
And
we're the 3rd day into it of a very long week now.
Yeah, it's this really rough weekend, I know. And I was getting updates on my phone throughout the weekend as well.
Sure.
And we were having member discussions about
Yep.
all the budgetary stuff going on. So we're definitely going to get into all that, and definitely want to chat with you about the budget and see what you've been hearing. Before we do, we usually do like a weekly recap, some of the stuff that's been going on over the past week, but we're going to do it a little bit differently today. So, I wanted to ask kind of you a question first in this section of the pod. Just basically what your thoughts are on the role that lobbyists play in the legislative process as a lobbyist, and kind of educating the listeners on, how that whole thing works.
Well, one of the most common questions I get either with my law school students or guest lectures I make at colleges, and even speaking to, like the Assembly and Senate fellows and the SAC semester students and others is, did you know you wanted to be a lobbyist? And I always jokingly say I can't imagine anyone growing up saying, I want to be a lobbyist, let alone even knowing what they do.
Right.
And I sort of fell into it after some legislative work and being at a law firm that did both lobbying and political and election law. But what do we do? I think there are really 2 roles. Most people view a lobbyist as only advocating. Some have given themselves the title of like governmental advocate or legislative advocate, okay? But half of it really, in my mind, is education. Now, granted, some of that education can easily spill over to advocacy, but, every meeting that we have with a legislator like yourself or staff is not always please vote yes or please vote no on something. Oftentimes it's just educating legislators how a proposal might impact an industry or perhaps an individual client, And so a good part of that, and we do a lot of educational tours. One of my clients, Niagara Bottling, has had legislators and staff visit their facilities in Northern and Southern California, where they are North America's largest bottled water maker, and to see that process. We also, at least once, sometimes twice a year in the forestry industry, my client Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies, they often have tours of their North Coast lands, bringing legislators and staff up there to actually traipse out into the forest and see what's going on and how they properly manage the forest. So again, that's all education. That's not advocacy.
Right.
You're not talking about bills or regulations specifically or advocating one way or the other. So a long answer to your question, what does a lobbyist do? They both educate and advocate, of course, on behalf of people. Either, I'm generally a business community lobbyist, although I have some public sector clients like LA Metro Transit, nonprofits and others. And there are others who represent strictly associations or companies or labor unions, et cetera.
Sure.
I mean, there's literally, as you know, there's an association for everyone and everything out there.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, and it's interesting too. Another thing that I think lobbyists tend to do as well is let members know how their client or an issue impacts their district too. And that's
Absolutely.
something that I always appreciate is, you're obviously coming in to represent a particular client, but you're also coming in to educate us on, how this specific policy or bill is going to impact our district,
Yep.
Which is really important for us to be aware of. And so I've found that really helpful.
No doubt. And certainly there are some, again, going to my forestry client, not all 120 legislative districts, or certainly the 80 assembly ones, for example, have timber in their districts.
Sure.
So not only do you talk to and educate your own representatives, in Humboldt and Mendocino County, but also the next step probably is other members who represent some forestry lands. But then, of course, you got to go to the non-forestry legislators and say, here's why you should care.
Absolutely.
In the transportation world, certainly our first point of contact for LA Metro is our very significant by number, LA delegation in both the Assembly and Senate. But sometimes either transportation funding or other issues may affect Northern California areas different than Southern California districts, or it may be urban versus rural, right? And those types of things. And so you not only have to educate your own delegation members, for example, again, LA County, but then those who are not in LA County and why they should care. Maybe the neighboring counties who have, say, employees who have to get public transit into LA County to a job, for example.
Well, the forest management one's important too, because in my district, for example, I've got, the northeastern part of Sacramento County. We don't have, a big, immediate issue with fires, right? But when we do have a lot of counties nearby that have had very large fires in recent years, that it is obviously directly impacts their residents, but it indirectly impacts my district because we have the layers of smoke that come over my district. We actually canceled school on a number of occasions and actually had a lot of, air quality impacts to those fires. Even though they weren't directly in our district, they have an impact on our district. So, I think it's really important to know what's going on around you as well.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Assemblyman, because I remember so distinctly a few years ago when we have major Northern California fires and the smoke went into the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
Despite being right there by the water and usually getting at least, air off of the Pacific Ocean, blowing inland, they couldn't clear the smoke, the wildfire smoke. And so people were actually massed up in downtown San Francisco due to the wildfire smoke that had come into the Bay Area. So even though there isn't forestry in downtown San Francisco, guess what?
Yeah.
Those residents were directly impacted by Northern California fires during that time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. The other interesting thing about this whole advocacy dynamic, I think, is the voters a few years back changed term limits in California.
They did.
So it used to be where you could only serve 6 years in the Assembly and then 8 years in the Senate for a total of 14.
And remember, those are lifetime bans.
Yeah.
It's not sitting out an election or two. It's lifetime.
Yeah, lifetime, 6 years and 8 years. Yep. And that was actually, I don't even remember the year that those term limits were put in place.
1990 was it the 90s? By Prop 140. That was the Pete Shabaram initiative. This is when they, used then Speaker Willie Brown as the poster child, who famously or infamously described himself as the Ayatollah of the Assembly. And there were a lot of people who were unhappy about that. Yeah. I do remember, though, because I started in the mid-'90s lobbying. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But I remember that after Speaker Brown stepped down, that in 1995 and became mayor of San Francisco, even Republican legislators said they missed him and how he ran the Assembly. Wow. So, to the outside world, he was not a positive figure, but to those who worked in the legislature realized the benefit of having such an experienced speaker at the time.
Yeah, and I think, the term limits are obviously very popular with voters traditionally, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge is, and we do this with, I think with policy in California a lot, is where the pendulum swings, it's one way and then it's all the way the other way. When we put those initial term limits in place, you could only serve 6 years in the assembly, and many of those folks, there's double the amount of assembly members in the legislature as there are senators.
Yes.
So you're talking for many of those folks, they get 6 years total in their careers to legislate. And the problem with that, while some folks may think, oh, that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
The problem with that is you don't really have hardly any time to develop expertise in any issue area. And in my opinion, it actually gave folks like yourself, the lobbyists and the third house that is referred to, and other consultants and people that aren't on term limits, kind of really all the knowledge, right, and all the institutional knowledge of all these policy areas. And so when the voters, I think more recently, and now I'm going to test your knowledge again, I guess, on that one. No, I'm kidding. You don't have to tell me that one, but I think it was within the last decade.
Correct.
Changed it.
It was in 2010 because the first group came in 2012.
That's right.
Yes,
yeah.
Yep.
So in 2010, we changed it again to allow 12 years total, but you could serve it in either house. So you can actually do 12 in the Assembly or 12 in the Senate now.
But note that it was reduced by 2 years.
In total, right?
Yeah, it went from 14 total to 12. Granted, again, it could be in one single house as opposed to a maximum 8 or a maximum 6.
Right.
But I always jokingly said, the only reason why that passed is because the voters saw reduced terms from 14 to 12. I'm all for it.
That's right. Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
They didn't care about stability or being able to serve in one whole house for 12 years. They were just like, reduce their terms by another 2 years, throw the bums out.
I'm in. That's great. Well, and it is interesting because, I do think that allows someone that may serve in the Assembly 10 to 12 years, right?
Yeah.
The ability to develop a better expertise for their constituents, for
for
who they represent. And, because honestly, a lot of when you're a newly elected member, I mean, a lot of, you're learning, it's like drinking through a fire hose,
of course.
I mean, it is just, there's so much to learn, and it takes a few years to really figure this place out. And under the prior system, by the time you figured it out, you were done, right?
Well, I always remember some others, third house and even legislators saying to me, here was their view of the 6 years in the Assembly, right? 3 2-year terms. First term, figuring out the lay of the land. The second term, 2 years, actually working. And then the third and final term, running for something else. So the argument is you're only getting like 2 good years out of these people.
Wow.
And, I don't know if that's 100% accurate across the board, but you understand the point.
It's a pretty good assessment.
I thought the other interesting thing is that historically, as you know, at least the old progression was maybe city council or school board, right? Maybe board of supervisors, then assembly, then Senate, and then maybe Congress or statewide was sort of the natural progression. Well, after term limits really took effect in the mid-90s and started, causing people to lose their seats or having to step down, you actually had people going directly to the Senate, right? And serving those 8 years and then returning to the Assembly. Again, there wasn't that old progression, and you still see that today. There are some members who will serve 12 years in the Senate, never see the Assembly, and vice versa.
Sure.
I think the other interesting dynamic, if I can mention, is that, one of the selling points, of course, was stability. And those who were in the legislature as members and staff, and certainly those in, as you said, the third house and the lobby corps, thought stability, they'll be here 12 years. I don't have the exact count, but remember the first 12-year class took office in 2012. So they will finish their maximum 12 years in one house in 24, in another year. And about a third of the 2012 class are actually serving today.
Wow.
So two-thirds of them,
they're already gone.
as you know, due to reapportionment, a handful chose not to run
Sure.
for a single last term.
Sure, yeah.
Others naturally found other offices, both Congress, but a lot have returned to local office. Some have gotten appointments. Assemblyman David Chu, the city attorney of LA, former Assemblyman Ed Chow became a judge of the Superior Court. And of course, as we know, several took a public position. I'm sorry, I've missaid it again. A private sector role, right? Former Assembly member Lorena Gonzalez is now head of the Labor Fed. Others stepped down to become to join the California Hospital Association and other groups. So, again, those 2012ers,
a lot of them didn't stick around for that whole
only
12.
about a third will actually end up serving the full 12 years.
It's interesting, really interesting.
So,
yeah, it's been an interesting to kind of see all these different from no term limits to the 1990 term limits to the 2010 term limits.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't know what your view is, and would welcome that. But my perspective is first and foremost, the best term limit is getting out and voting. And, if you don't like the job that your representative is at city council or Congress or governor, then, vote against them. But if you had to do term limits, honestly, I still think you ought to go longer than 12. I don't think it should be lifetime. I don't even think 25 or 30, but, maybe 16, maybe 20-ish, a full career. So I've warmed up to term limits, but I still think 12 is too short. But I just don't envision the California electorate going longer. No, sir.
Well, and I know most of the conversation, to be honest with you, I feel like has shifted or really existed for a while at the congressional level, right? Because they don't have term limits.
Of course.
In Congress.
You have to amend the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. So, I know there's some folks that want to change that. That's a little bit bigger of a lift, I think. But you are seeing folks that, it's like a lifetime gig. And then,
of course.
You have people in Congress that, and I won't name any names or anything, but it's, that have been there for most of their lives. Probably, should have considered stepping down a little sooner. And
undoubtedly.
And yet we see people just hold on as long as they possibly can. I don't know about you, but I don't know. I would not want to be in Congress in my 80s. There are better things to do,
especially from California, going back and forth.
Oh my gosh! But
it's one thing for our Southern California legislators to fly an hour up to Sacramento a few times a week, but boy, cross country,
DC constantly.
No.
I feel like by that point you're just a DC resident for the most part. But anyway,
well, I know some members, particularly from the West Coast, have moved their family back there. Anyway,
it's interesting. So we'll see how that progresses. But I agree. I think the term limits as they are in California are probably going to stay that way for a while.
I agree.
There was the one story I wanted to bring up with you. Our outgoing speaker, Anthony Rendon, in the Assembly, did an LA Times interview this week. It just got posted.
Okay.
And he was asked what advice he would give to the incoming speaker, who actually gets sworn in this Friday.
He does, Robert Rivas.
Assemblymember Robert Rivas from Salinas. And so I was going to read you this quote and get your take on it. But the outgoing speaker, Rendon, said, "I'm from Western California." I'm going to have to edit this a little bit.
Oh, okay.
"I'm from Western California, and so is he. We've done an S job with Eastern California. You draw a straight line through California, Coachella, Inland Empire, Central Valley, up to Redding and up. We've done I'll say, terrible job of making sure there's anything close to equity in terms of resources on their side of the line." And this kind of goes back to your point earlier about rural versus urban versus, I thought that was a really interesting comment coming from someone who, represents Anthony Rendon, who represents an urban core of the state.
Of course.
I actually thought incoming Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas, I think his district is kind of unique for a speaker of the Assembly. And we discussed last week with Joe Patterson that, is that going to change how the legislature, focuses on policy? Because he does, represent a slightly more rural part of California.
Absolutely.
But I do agree with this Speaker Rendon here that we've really forgotten about half of the state. and
A geographic half.
geographically.
I mean,
yeah,
I think
geographically.
one of the reasons for that, if I may, is probably, look, the vast population centers are,
Sure.
if you will, the western half of
Yeah.
California, to use that dichotomy between the two halves. And of course, that's where the bulk of legislators are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at the 20 in Los Angeles County, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Versus just a handful. Literally, there are more legislators representing either the Bay Area or Los Angeles than that entire eastern side of California.
Yep.
So they lack the representation, but they also lack the population. It doesn't mean that they should be ignored by any means. I'm just saying, I think the practical reality is due to representation.
Sure.
Again, not only in the legislature, but ultimately in population, which means there are greater funding needs, right, to the western side or the western half of California. So I don't have the silver bullet as to how to, address that with the incoming speaker, but just to be aware of it and keep it in mind, I think, is half the battle.
Yeah. No, it's true. And, I think this is one of the challenges with governing California is it's such a diverse state.
Yes, it is.
It has, very highly populated urban areas. But such a huge geographical portion of the state is actually rural, is actually, has completely different needs. And too often, I think the legislature does these one-size-fits-all policy solutions or approaches that really leave a lot of people out, I think, and really have the best interests of those urban areas in mind, but not necessarily the best interest of, the rest of California. So it's really interesting.
Well, I hearken back to earlier in our conversation talking about my forestry client. They've got almost 250,000 acres they own and manage in Humboldt County and in Mendocino County, right? 2 of the 58 counties. And together, actually, their districts include more than those 2 counties, but those 440,000 acres of timberland that they own have 1 senator and 1 assembly member, right?
That is amazing.
Think about the handful of acres in downtown LA that have multiple representatives, right?
Well, I'll talk to some of my colleagues. I mean, it takes me, I'm in a suburban district, right? It takes me maybe 45 minutes to drive across it, right? Which a lot of people are very jealous because, I've got colleagues that it takes them 5-6 hours to get across their district.
Yes.
And so even just the logistical part of representing a district of that size is really challenging.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I remember it's funny on the first day of the swearing in when you're a new assembly member or
December
senator.
5th,
But this last year was December 5th when I got sworn in. And they do something just once every 2-year session where they call roll by county.
Exactly. Right.
And so they actually, go down the list, Alpine, Amador, whatever, I don't know all the A counties, but, they start listing from alphabetical and you're supposed to stand up when your county is called or when the first county you represent you here is called.
Yeah.
And so, it's like Sacramento, it's like, okay, me and a couple other people. But, when you like Los Angeles, like a quarter of the room stands up. And that really was eye-opening just on day one.
Yeah.
Like
that was my point between the western and eastern. Right?
Is represented by Los Angeles County, right? So, of course, when you have that level of representation, that's kind of the direction the policy is going to go. But it's just it was really eye-opening on day one to just see that dichotomy between the more rural counties and the more urban counties.
look at the leadership, not only speaker, as you note, the uniqueness of the incoming this Friday of Robert Rivas, but also prior ones, from Los Angeles.
Sure. Los Angeles, San Francisco,
briefly San Diego, but again, all very urban, large population centers historically. So you do wonder, as you said, how that plays out with the new speaker.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So we'll see how that goes. Last part of this segment we'll do is you had sent me a few topics, so I wanted to chat about a couple things with you. Basically, the main topic being major changes over the last few years in the legislature. The three that I kind of noted here is the 72-hour rule. I added this in, the bill limit increase a few years back, because I know you recently wrote something on that, and then the majority vote budget. So we can go down, one by one here, but the 72-hour rule, like, talk to us about that. Like, how has that, well, explain to the listeners what the 72-hour rule is, and then how it's kind of impacted policy in California.
Well, the voters adopted Prop 54 in 2018, and that did two things. One is it gave the public the right to record, both audio and visual, the public hearings and floor sessions of the legislature. So before, you had to, for example, get permission if you were in a hearing room of an Assembly or Senate legislative committee, if you wanted to try to record or even to take a photo, like maybe somebody was testifying for the first time in their life and a friend or a family member or even a professional photographer took a photo or something. Or if the media was there, TV, radio, and wanted to record something, they needed the permission of the chair. That's no longer the case. And secondly, the legislature has to post immediately on their website, both the Assembly and Senate, and hold for 20 years on those websites, all the floor sessions and all the committee hearings, which is good if you want to look back at what happened. For example, if you're interested perhaps in finding some limited legislative history, right, on something. The second piece was the 72-hour rule. So this came about because of the infamous gut and amends. Now, we do gut and amends throughout the summer, but at the end of the legislative session is where it really becomes problematic. And what does gut and amend mean? It means you have an existing bill, say, dealing with education, and you gut it, meaning you pull all those provisions out and amend the second piece, and you put in entirely new subject matter. So yes, it could go from education to transportation, from taxation to healthcare, et cetera. And so a lot of people complained, especially at the end of a legislative session, when you had all these new bills that had never been heard anywhere or debated or considered or analyzed or had public input, right? No hearing, no ability to send a letter in support or opposition, et cetera, and they would just spring up. And sometimes it was mere hours before the legislature adjourned for the year. I mean, I remember one year, I'll never forget it, especially since it's never happened since, but we were in what we referred to as the Rules Committee room. It was a beautiful little wood-paneled room that held the meetings of the Rules Committee off the Assembly floor. And during the last day or two of the legislative session, they would actually have different committees coming in and out of that room just to hear these gutted and amended bills at the last minute.
To check the box.
So that technically there was a public hearing, assuming you had notice of it, and boy, could you see the language, et cetera.
Right.
Anyways, so so that's what they had. And so I remember looking up behind me, because there was a clock. There was a large conference room table with nice chairs for the legislators to sit at. And then it was lined on the back wall with chairs, usually for staff. And then there was like 3 or 4 rows for the public to sit at. And I remember looking up behind me, and it said 5:25 a.m. Now, remember, the legislature had convened at 10 a.m. the prior morning, and they were still going anyways.
Oh, my gosh.
So what the voters did in Prop 54 is they said, no more of that stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean gut and amends can't happen. They can.
Right.
But it says that before the legislature can vote on a bill in its quote-unquote final form, it has to be in print for 72 hours.
Okay.
And honestly, Assemblyman, that's one of the complaints of the budget staff, because now, in order to have the budget bill voted by June 15th, they actually have to have a deal or the language done and public June 12th, right? Yeah. And keep in mind, it is 72 hours. It's not 3 days. I know people use it interchangeably, but the Constitution speaks to 72 hours. And I emphasize that because they actually post the time that a bill's amendments became public and they count 72 hours later and know that that's when they can take the vote in
Got
the
it.
72 hours plus 1 minute, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what transpired. And so with that history, what it means is really a couple of things. Number one is there is notice. Look, to be fair, 72 hours isn't great because it takes a while for this stuff to filter down and get out there, okay?
Yeah.
It's not like the public or even, say, the regulated community is sitting at their computer refreshing on the Leg Info website like
Especially if it happens on a Saturday morning, like it
we
did
had
over
with the
weekend,
budget, right? You have to affirmatively look for that stuff. It doesn't just appear in your inbox and say, oh, hey, 20 bills got amended Saturday morning around 10 a.m., right? You have to affirmatively go find it. Anyway, so...
But it is better than... I still think it's better than 0 minutes.
100%. I'm
or
not...
0 hours.
I'm not being critical of the fact that at least there's 72 hours notice. My point is ideally you could drop back even further just to allow greater public awareness, greater analysis. You know, it's one thing if a gut and amend or any amendment, by the way, that 72-hour rule applies to, okay? Even a technical amendment it applies to, let alone a substantive one. But even if a bill is 1 page, as you know, some of these, thanks to the Assembly Republican caucus budget staff, they counted about 2,700 pages of amendments in those 20 bills, okay? Yeah. And so that's hard to read and analyze in 72 hours. Sure. And of course, legislators like yourself in both houses, to be fair, want to know, now that they're in print, what do they do?
What do they do?
And what's the implication?
Yep.
Well, some of these staffers are reading it for the first time and trying to analyze it and not only explain to their legislators what is existing law, what does this bill do, but what are its implications? 72 hours might be adequate for a short bill, but when you get close to 24 of them, thousands of pages wow, that's pretty hard.
It is. And our staff works incredibly hard to keep up with this.
Absolutely, every last one of them.
Honestly, I think it just emphasizes, and I actually agree with you. I think 72 hours is certainly better than how it was before, but it is still a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
And, the lengths that our staff is going through right now as we speak, as we record this podcast, to analyze some of these budget proposals that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes here.
And answer your questions and tell you, back to the earlier part of our discussion, how does it impact my district?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that the question you're going to ask?
That's always the question I ask. So.
Right. Yeah. How does the transportation funding, how does the public safety funding, how does the resources funding, how does the health, how does it impact my constituents? That's what you care about.
Totally.
That's hard to do in just a few hours. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So the second one here, you wrote a little piece on this recently about, it's titled A Quick Look at Limits on Bill Introductions.
Yeah.
I remember when I started in the legislature, as a staffer many years ago, I guess it's been about 12 years ago now. I think it was 40 bills per session was the limit, at least
in both houses.
In both houses, I believe.
And the Senate's kept that.
And the Senate is still 40.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
But there was
not in your house.
A point in the Assembly, I forget what year, but they changed it to 50 per 2-year session.
Yeah.
I think when I talk to my constituents, when I go to community meetings, they think that the amount of bills we introduce in this state is insane. I mean, we introduced over 2,600 this year.
Yes.
That's potentially 2,600 new laws. Now, not all of them are going to necessarily move forward.
But we average 850 to 1,100 new laws every year. Yeah.
And my constituents, a lot of them at least, think that is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I personally think that is, I would like to see. It'd be interesting to know the breakdown, but I mean, if some of those laws or those bills are repealing laws, I'd be fine with it. But I just think we have way too many laws in our state as it is. But how, what were your thoughts? What are your thoughts on these bill limits? I know you wrote kind of a comparison piece to other states. And,
I mean, I definitely looked at other states just to, and now to be fair.
Yeah.
quite a few states have no limit.
No limit, right.
And as you are familiar with, especially in your earlier tenure before elected office, there are certainly people even today, let alone in prior sessions, who believe that there shouldn't be a limit, that legislators should be able to introduce as many bills and all of that. But, I think a lot of the ills, if you will, of the legislative process.
Yeah.
And please understand that this is coming from someone who lives and breathes this, but more importantly, loves the institution and loves the process itself. So I say this to protect it,
Yeah.
And that is, I think, one of the biggest problems in the legislative process is just the sheer volume of bills.
Yeah.
Now, as you can imagine, every bill has some champion behind it, and so it's important to everybody. But, I don't think that we need that many. And for somebody who is not only a student of the process, but as I teach about it, especially to law students, I realize one of the major shortcomings is that we really don't debate and discuss bills on the floor, but really in committee, which is where, as you know, all the substantive work is actually done.
Yeah.
When the houses of Congress, look, you can introduce anything you want. There aren't limits in Congress.
Right.
But very few get a hearing. And whereas about 40% of those 2,600 bills that get introduced become law in the state, 40%. Anywhere between 3 and 5% do in Congress at the federal level.
Incredible.
So it's a vast difference. So we don't have to hear everything that's introduced, but that's a discussion for another day. I have my thoughts on hearing bills, but
we've talked about that on the podcast.
Yeah, but the point here is that we just have so many that we really give short shrift to debate. And when there is discussion, it's bigger topics like, let's just pretend that you had introduced a bill on, increasing the research and development tax credit. What is the debate? The debate is usually like, do tax credits work? Do we want to encourage more R&D in this state? Right? Sort of big picture public policy. Is there any litigation or dispute, or when a taxpayer is audited by the Franchise Tax Board, everybody kind of understands what the purpose is, right, of that tax credit and why you have it and why you might increase it. But how did you guys, the legislature, how did you decide what type of equipment would qualify for that tax credit? Why are some taxpayers allowed to claim it while others aren't?
Interesting.
That's where the disputes are.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, but your debates in committee on the floor give absolutely zero insight.
Oh, yeah.
So there's very little in the analyses. That's not a criticism of any of your staff, let alone the committee consultants. They're overwhelmed.
Oh, sure.
They have too many damn bills to analyze.
When the Assembly can introduce a maximum of 4,000 bills every 2 years, it's...
Yeah.
And that's just one
house.
As
you know, you attend and participate in hearings where there's 30, 40, sometimes 50 bills at a single hearing. As you know from House of Origin, and you'll experience at the end of session, you did as a staffer, but as a member now, there are hundreds of votes taken in a single day.
Hundreds. House of Origin this year, I think it was like 700 something bills we had to fly through in 2 weeks. So I totally agree with
you. Did over 200 in one single day.
Yeah. And I agree with you. It's not a place where debate happens. Most of the bills don't even get, debated on the floor because, they're trying to rush them all through.
Exactly.
Committee is where that's supposed to happen. And I've been really, honestly disappointed in the lack of robust debate in committees this year, particularly when it comes to bills, assembly bills in the assembly.
Sure.
A lot of it is, we're working out the kinks and we'll fix it in the Senate.
Please give me the courtesy of moving this as a quote unquote work in progress.
Yeah. We move these works in progress forward without, a lot of scrutiny. And we give these courtesy votes. I feel a little more flexibility to vote no on things that that I don't feel are ready
Yeah.
in terms of from a policy standpoint. But the committees as a whole will push through these works in progress.
And I would just add an addendum because you noted in the first house, right? And this is the first year of the 2-year session.
Right.
Everything doesn't happen this year.
No.
A bill introduced next year, it's got the one session. That's it.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
2024 bills introduced by February have to be done by August 31. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But now we've got time. So,
you have next year. So if a bill's not cooked now, wait until January.
Well, and for the listeners that aren't aware, our sessions are 2-year sessions,
Yes.
right? And they, anything, introduced this year can still be alive next year.
Yep.
They're
carried over to the second year. Yep.
Yeah. So we do have more time. Yeah. It's just fascinating to me that, but I totally agree with that concern. And I think we're seeing that more and more.
Well, and I know in talking to dozens, if not a few hundred, not only staff or members, right, for the legislators themselves, the 120, but the committee consultants.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's a single staff member in the California State Capitol or the legislative office building now, the swing space, as we call it, wants 40 or let alone 50 bills per 2-year session either. That's a lot of work to staff those bills.
It's a lot of work.
Because as you know, your staff not only has to staff your bills, but they have to staff all the bills that come before you for
analyze.
a vote.
Yep, absolutely. So the third major change in recent years was the majority vote budget.
Oh, yes. Prop
I know
25.
you brought this one up, Prop 25. Tell us a little bit about what Prop 25 did and how you think it has changed the budget process.
Sure. Well, prior to the voters, again, adopting, they passed Prop 25. It was put on the ballot, just like the term limits change by the legislature.
Sure.
As opposed to Prop 54 that included that 72-hour requirement. That was done by initiative, by the people.
Citizen initiative.
Gathering signatures and placing it on the ballot. Of course, the second way is the legislature, so Prop 25 was done. As you're familiar with, at the time, California was one of 3 states that allowed, or that required, a 2/3, a supermajority to pass the
nation.
Budget.
One of 3 states
one of 3
in the nation.
states
Wow.
in the nation, And, the concern, of course, that was expressed is that allowed at the time when Republicans obviously had more than 1/3 of each house, the ability to, quote unquote, leverage a budget vote for some sort of either budget or policy change.
Sure.
And so a lot of Democratic legislators and a lot of interest groups said, we don't like that. And let's go to a majority vote like the vast majority of other states.
Sure.
And so they put it before the voters. Well, now I don't have the scientific basis for this, but sort of like with term limits, my view of it is, why did it easily pass? Because the voters saw we're reducing their term limits from 14 to 12, right? We get to throw the bums out two years earlier. What was the selling point of Prop 25? Was it majority vote? No. I don't recall much about that at all.
It was taking away legislator pay, right?
If they didn't get the budget done by June 15th, they don't get paid. Yes.
Yep.
The rest of us pay our bills on time.
That's
the rest of us do everything under deadline. They should too. What do you mean? They can keep it past June 15th. As you know,
Still
the
get their
longest
paycheck,
budget went till October and they're still going to get paid. No.
Yep.
We're going to punish them. I mean, I remember talking to family members about Prop 25 and the pros and cons, and all everyone focused on was, oh yeah, they shouldn't get paid if they can't meet the budget deadline. What's the big deal? They can do that. That's easy.
Yeah.
So yes.
Great point.
And so there you go. That's what sold it to the electorate. And so now California requires a majority vote. I think what's interesting is that it's not just the budget bill, right? There's one big bill that's due by June 15th, the budget bill. It's one bill. This year it's SB 102 by Skinner. That's Senator Nancy Skinner, the chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate. That's the one bill that has to be done by June 15th. but there are bills with appropriations that are associated with the budget. And that language opens the door for two other types of bills. And this is in the legislative process weeds for your listeners, but this is budget bills junior. Those are bills that amend the budget bill, which is why we call them a budget bill junior, and there's more than one. The budget that we are in now for the fiscal year that ends the end of this week, June 30th. So this is the 2022-23 budget we're currently in. At least a half a dozen times, the budget bill passed in June of 22 has been amended by a budget bill junior. So one thing since I began lobbying, we only had one budget bill and a handful of trailer bills. Now we have the one budget bill required by the Constitution.
Sure.
But now we can have up to 6 or 7 budget bills junior, and anywhere from 15 or 20 to upwards of 50 to 60 by the end of the fiscal year of trailer bills.
Yeah.
What's the trailer bill? Well, we call it a trailer bill because it trails the budget, but those are used to make statutory changes to implement the budget originally. So they were usually pared down simple things.
Sure.
Now they have significant public policy
Yes, they do.
that may or may not have ever been heard in a policy committee, let alone passed a policy committee. Those too are allowed to be adopted or enacted by the legislature by a mere majority vote, unless, for example, a tax increase and a few other exceptions.
Sure.
So that's a big change that Prop 25 did. Again, it punishes financially legislators if they don't do their job by June 15th.
Sure.
But again, that majority vote is not just the budget bill, but everything else that's a part of it, including substantive policy changes.
Well, and I think it's interesting that I feel like legislators have found a way to work around this to a degree and pass that kind of semi-agreed upon budget just to meet that requirement so they can get their paycheck, and then they work out the details later, which is what we're seeing right now. So it's kind of been interesting how it's worked out over the last few years. I think there was only one time that I remember when legislators actually didn't get paid, and that was when Governor Brown vetoed the budget a few years ago. But
they still got paid because they had done their job of passing.
Sure.
The fact that the governor vetoed it didn't change the constitutional requirement. So no, since the adoption of Prop 25 by the voters, the legislature has always complied with passing a budget by June 15th. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yep.
Well, I know, speaking of budget, I know you got to get to some budget hearings. So our last segment
and you
here,
to floor session. So
exactly.
Yes,
Our last segment here is just looking ahead at what's coming this week. And I think, to stay on this topic of budgets, I wanted to ask you, kind of what you're seeing with the budget this week. I know by the time this podcast gets released, we'll probably already have passed some of it.
Sure.
But some of the things that I've heard this week is we need a 3-party agreement between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor.
Yep.
There's 22 possible trailer bills that you just kind of defined what that is. Mm-hmm. These budget trailer bills that are coming, and there's also 5 infrastructure streamlining bills that potentially are going to move forward as policy bills with an urgency clause. Yeah. And the rumors that I have heard is that the governor is really trying to lock in that negotiation before 1 and 2. Those other budget bills can get figured out. So, what are you hearing out there? And what do you expect this week?
Sure. Well, as of Monday late morning, 5 days prior to the end of the fiscal year and the new budget being due, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, that is the current status of things.
Yeah.
The legislature, the 2 houses budget committees are supposed to consider the bills that are in print later this afternoon. Tomorrow, Tuesday, you're supposed to be voting on it. Mm-hmm. Some of these bills are not quite ready. 2 of the trailer bills came into print Sunday, which means they're not eligible until Wednesday. And as you pointed out, we've got 5 or more bills for the governor's infrastructure streamlining package that aren't even in print as of today. so far, and so those will have to happen probably at Thursday's floor session.
Yeah.
So you, the legislature, have a very busy week in the budget, and of course today, tomorrow, Wednesday, you'll be doing policy committee hearings because in 3 weeks you have the policy committee deadline for all the SBs out of your policy committees and all the ABs out of the Senate policy committees. So you're really juggling not only the state budget and 24 trailer bills, but also the hundreds of bills that are going through committee this week and over the next 2 weeks. So, I mean, that's the lay of the land. It's a crazy time of year for everyone.
It is, and I think there's a couple big sticking points still. There's transit funding, which is still being discussed. I know you've got a transit client that they're still negotiating on. The other big one that I've kind of been engaging on is this Delta conveyance project. I know the governor wants to include a Delta tunnel plan, basically expediting the Delta tunnel plan in his infrastructure bill package. A lot of legislators in my area, in Northern California, in the Central Valley, have big concerns about that. It's a very politically challenging topic,
definitely,
with a lot of controversy and opposition. And so a lot of the Delta community representatives like myself have said, we can have a policy conversation about the tunnels, but it can't be rushed through the process like it's being right now. And so that has kind of been something that I've been working on. But there's still a handful of sticking points like that that they're still trying to work out. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, this is the time of year where the governor in particular has a lot of leverage for the budget. So I would expect just like his predecessors have done, they try to get as much as they can out of the budget negotiation. So
well, and he also has a line item veto power as well.
He does.
Does he ever use that? Do you think has Governor Newsom ever used that?
He has with earlier ones. The last couple of budgets, he and the two Democratic leaders of the Assembly and Senate have effectively put together agreed upon budgets that did not necessitate any reduction or elimination, i.e. what is the power of the line item veto? They can reduce or eliminate entirely a single item of appropriation. So he really hasn't had to exercise that much in the budget more recently, only because, again, those three-party deals, as you've mentioned, they worked everything out. And so the governor ended up signing everything as is and not needing to make any changes to it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks for having
me. Just any final thoughts?
No, I appreciate you having me, and hopefully you'll have some non-legislators down the road as well. Thanks for having me the first one.
Absolutely.
So appreciate that. Very nice.
No, I think this was really, really great conversation, and we do want to have some different guests come on with different perspectives, and I really appreciate your expertise that you shared. Just a couple quick announcements. Next week, we're going to be joined by Devin Mathis, Assembly District 33 in the Central Valley, leading into 4th of July. To talk, Devin is a veteran, and we're going to talk about some military issues.
Yes.
If you want to share ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can watch and subscribe on YouTube at Point of Order Pod. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. You can also follow today's host on Twitter. I'm at Joshua_Hoover, and then Chris is at Chris Micheli. Micheli spelled Micheli. If you want to, and Chris, by the way, I follow him on Twitter, and he's got a lot of great content. So make sure to hit the follow button.
It's educational.
Very educational. So thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming out today.
Thanks, Assemblyman. Appreciate the time.